The champagne glass was already halfway to her lips when she saw us walk in, and it never made it the rest of the way. "Oh, my God," she said, loud enough for 3 tables to turn. "Is that Darnell? Still dragging that kid everywhere like a security blanket?" Laughter rippled out from her circle, sharp and rehearsed, the kind of laughter that had been waiting all night for a target to walk through the door. My daughter's hand tightened in mine. Nobody in that ballroom knew that 11 hours earlier, I had signed the largest solar infrastructure contract in the history of the state of Georgia. $480 million. My signature. My company. Nobody knew that the man they were about to spend the next 20 minutes mocking owned the building most of them had driven to that reunion in. The parking garage attached to the hotel bore my company's name on a small brass plaque by the elevator bank. Easy to miss unless you were looking for it. Exactly the way I'd always wanted it. Nobody knew that the modest gray sedan sitting 3 levels down in that garage had been chosen on purpose. The same way the plain charcoal suit on my back had been chosen on purpose. Because a man who has spent 6 years building something real learns early that the wrong kind of attention can undo careful work faster than any competitor ever could. My ex-wife didn't know any of it. She was about to find out in front of every person who had ever doubted me. There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a room in a half-second before something breaks. The silence of 200 people sensing, without being told, that they are about to witness something they will talk about for years. That silence was still 40 minutes away from that ballroom, but it was coming. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because everything you're about to hear happened in the space between 2 silences. The one that started the evening, easy and forgettable, and the one that ended it, the kind nobody in that room would forget for the rest of their lives. Stay with me, because what happens in the next hour of this story is the reason I'm telling it all. My name is Darnell Ross. I'm 39 years old, and for the last 6 years, my life is run on a schedule so precise you could set a watch to it. 5:45 a.m., up before the sun, coffee in the pot before my feet hit the floor. 6:15, wake my daughter, Amara, gentle at first, firmer the second time, because that girl sleeps like she's being paid for it. 6:40, breakfast. Eggs most mornings, oatmeal when we're running late, pancakes on Sundays because that was her mother's tradition before her mother stopped showing up for traditions. 7:15, braids if it's a braid day. 20 minutes of careful sectioning while Amara narrates an entire imaginary conversation between her stuffed rabbit and whatever cartoon she watched the night before. 7:45, out the door. That routine had not changed in 6 years. Not once. Not through blizzards. Not through the year I had 11 employees and a laptop that crashed twice a week. Not through the year I had 400 employees and a boardroom with a view of the Atlanta skyline. Nobody at my daughter's school knew what I did for a living. I filled out the form every September the same way. Father, self-employed. Construction and energy. That was true. It just left out a few zeros. Amara was 7. She had her mother's eyes and my stubborn chin, and she asked questions the way most kids ask for candy. Constantly, and like she deserved an answer. Daddy, why do you always wear the same watch? Because it was your grandfather's. Daddy, why do we live in a big house like Kayla's dad? Because I like this house. It's got you in it. She'd nodded at that one like it settled something important and gone back to her cereal. I built my company the way I raised my daughter, quietly, without an audience, one unglamorous morning at a time. Solar panel installation on residential roofs first, then commercial, then infrastructure contracts for municipalities that wanted to modernize their grids without bankrupting their budgets. 6 years, 400 employees, a company now valued at just north of $2 billion. According to the term sheet my CFO had walked into my office with the week before. I hadn't told anyone from my old life, not my mother, who still thought I was doing pretty good for myself. Not my college friends, most of whom I'd lost touch with. And certainly not the woman who left. Her name was Simone. 10 years ago, she walked out of our apartment on a Tuesday with 2 suitcases and a 2-year-old daughter. She left behind without a backward glance, and a story she'd tell people later about how she needed to find herself. I never corrected that story in public. I raised Amara alone instead. Some men mistake silence for weakness. I've learned the hard way it's usually the opposite. Which brings us to a Saturday night in October, in the grand ballroom of the Regency on Peachtree Street, at my high school's 10-year reunion. The first one I bothered to attend since everything fell apart. I almost didn't go. Amara made me. But before I tell you about that night, I need to take you back further, to the years nobody was watching, because you can't understand what happened in that ballroom without understanding what it cost to get there. There's a version of this story that starts with the reunion. I could tell it that way. It would be a shorter story. But the truth of it starts 3 years earlier than that, on a January morning so cold the door handle of my truck had frozen shut, in a gravel lot behind a strip mall in Riverdale, Georgia, where I sat with my forehead against the steering wheel for exactly 90 seconds before I let myself cry. I want to be honest with you about that morning, because too many stories like this one skip past the part where the man almost didn't make it, and I think that part matters more than any of what came after. Amara was 4. She was at my mother's that week because I'd fallen behind on daycare payments for the second month in a row, and my mother, who never once made me feel small for asking, had simply said, "Bring her over, baby. We'll figure the rest out later." The truck, a 2009 F-150 with 190,000 miles on it, bought with a loan my mother had co-signed because no bank in the state of Georgia would extend credit to a man 2 years into a divorce with a credit score that looked like a phone number, had thrown a check engine light 3 days earlier. I didn't have the $400 it would take to find out what was wrong with it. So I'd been driving it anyway, praying every morning that it would start, because that truck was the only thing standing between me and losing the 4 residential solar contracts I had scheduled that month. That morning, it didn't start. I sat in the cold with the engine refusing to turn over, and I did the math I'd been doing in my head for 2 years straight, for contracts worth about $6,000 combined if I could finish them on schedule. Rent due in 11 days. A landlord named Gerald Whitfield who had told me, the year before, in a conversation I still remember word for word, that he wasn't sure a single father doing manual labor work was the kind of tenant he wanted in a building with families in it. As if I wasn't also a family, as if Amara wasn't also a family, sitting right there in her car seat while he said it. I called my mother that morning, sitting in that frozen truck, and I didn't ask her for money. I just needed to hear her voice. "It's going to break before it makes you," she said, the way she always did when I called her, sounding like that. Everything that's worth having breaks you a little before it makes you. You remember that. I got the truck jumped by a mechanic 2 lots over who took pity on me and didn't charge for the diagnostic. Bad alternator. $280 I didn't have. I put on a credit card that was already close to its limit, finished all 4 contracts that week working 16-hour days, and made rent with $9 left in my checking account. I tell you all that not because I want your sympathy. I tell you that because 6 years later, when I stood at a podium in a glass conference room and signed my name to a $480 million contract, the first thing I thought about wasn't the number. It was that frozen truck door, my mother's voice on the phone, and the particular kind of quiet determination that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose except the one thing you refuse to lose no matter what. Your daughter's belief that her father always finds a way. I don't like talking about the night Simone left. I've made peace with it. Mostly the way you make peace with an old injury that still aches when the weather changes. But you need to understand what that night actually looked like, because the version Simone told people afterward, that she left to find herself, that the marriage simply ran its course, was never the whole truth, and the whole truth matters here. Amara was 2 years old. She had a fever that week. Nothing serious, just one of those toddler colds that turned the household upside down for 4 or 5 days. I remember Simone standing in the doorway of the nursery with 2 suitcases already packed, already by the front door, and I remember asking her, calm at first because I didn't understand yet what was happening, whether she was going to visit her sister for a few days. "I'm not coming back, Darnell," she said. "I need to find myself. I can't do this anymore." "Do what?" I asked, "Simone, our daughter has a fever. Can we talk about this after she's better?" "There's never going to be an after," she said. "That's the problem. It's always the next thing. The next bill, the next fever, the next crisis. I need something more than this." I asked her, standing in that doorway with Amara's cries carrying down the hall behind us, what exactly she thought she was going to find that was more than a family that needed her. She didn't have an answer for that. She picked up her suitcases and left, and I stood in the hallway of our apartment for a long time before I went back into the nursery and rocked my daughter back to sleep, because that was the only thing I knew how to do in that moment that made any sense at all. I found out 4 months later, from a mutual friend who felt I deserved to know, that Simone had already been seeing someone before she left, a man named Trevor who worked in commercial real estate and drove a car nicer than anything I'd ever be able to afford at the time. That relationship lasted 8 months before it fell apart too. There was another one after that, and another one after that. I never told Amara any of this. Obviously, kids don't need the granular details of the ways adults fail each other. What I told her when she got old enough to ask was simple and true. Your mother loves you, but she wasn't ready to be the kind of parent you needed when you needed it most. And that's not something you did wrong. That's something she's still working through. I believed that when I said it. I still do. But I want you to understand, before we go any further into this story, that the woman who walked into that ballroom 10 years later in a red dress that cost more than my first car was the same woman who once stood in a doorway with 2 packed suitcases and told a sick toddler's father that she needed to find herself. Some people spend their whole lives finding themselves and never once stop to ask what it costs the people they leave behind while they search. I'm not going to walk you through every hard year, because we'd be here all night, and because the specifics matter less than the shape of it. But I want to give you enough to understand what built quietly actually meant. The first year after Simone left, I worked 2 jobs. Days, I did residential handyman work for a contractor named Otis Freeman, an older man who'd taken a chance on me when nobody else would because he said I reminded him of himself 30 years earlier. Nights, 3 times a week, I did overnight stocking at a grocery store on the south side, coming home at 5 a.m. just in time to shower and get Amara up for daycare. I slept in 90-minute increments most of that year. I remember falling asleep once, briefly, at a red light, and waking up to the sound of a horn behind me, and particular terror of realizing my daughter was in the back seat when it happened. That was the night I decided something had to change. Not because the fear wasn't survivable. I'd survived plenty by then. But because I understood, sitting at that green light with my hand shaking on a wheel, that survival wasn't the same thing as building a life, and Amara deserved a life. Not just a father who was barely surviving one. I started small. A single solar panel installation certification course. Pay for an installments I could barely afford, taken online between shifts because I couldn't afford to lose the hours from either job to attend classes in person. I finished it in 4 months instead of the recommended 8. Studying in parking lots on my lunch break. Studying after Amara went to sleep. Studying on my phone during the slow hours of overnight stocking shifts when the store manager wasn't watching. The first job I ever did on my own, no boss, no crew, just me and a borrowed ladder, and a set of tools I bought secondhand from a retiring electrician, was a single residential rooftop installation for a woman named Miss Patrice, a retired school teacher on the west side who took a chance on an unknown 29-year-old with no company name and no reviews because, she told me later, she liked the way I talked to her about her electric bill instead of talking down to her about it. That job paid me $1,100. I remember exactly what I did with it because I've told this story to exactly one person before tonight, and that was Amara. Years later, on a night she asked me how the company started. I put $600 toward rent. I put $300 toward the credit card debt from the alternator repair. And I put the remaining $200 into a savings account I opened that same week under a name I picked because it sounded like something bigger than what it actually was. Ross Solar Solutions. There was no office. There was no crew. There was a man, a borrowed ladder, and $200 in a savings account with a name attached to it that I hadn't yet earned the right to believe in. That's where it started. Not in a boardroom. not with investors. In a savings account with $200 in it, named after a business that didn't exist yet accepting the part of me that refused to stop believing it eventually would. I think about Miss Patrice more than almost anyone else from those years, and I want to tell you why. Because it explains something about the man I became that the reunion story alone won't. She was 71 years old when I did her roof, widowed, living alone in a small brick house she'd owned outright for 20 years, on a fixed income that made her electric bill feel like a monthly emergency instead of a monthly expense. I remember standing on her roof that first day, checking the pitch and the sun exposure, and looking down to see her standing in the yard with a glass of sweet tea, watching me with the careful attention of someone who'd been let down by contractors before and wasn't going to let it happen again. "You sure you know what you're doing up there?" she called up to me. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I promise you, I do." "You look young." "I am young, ma'am, but I'm careful. There's a difference." She laughed at that, and something in her posture relaxed, just slightly. I finished the job in 2.5 days, working slower than I needed to because I wanted it done right the first time. Not fast, because a man building a reputation out of nothing can't afford a single call back for a job done wrong. When I came down off that roof the final time, she was waiting for me with a plate of food. She hadn't asked whether I wanted. The way older black women in every neighborhood I've ever lived in have always fed people whether they asked to be fed or not. "You've got a daughter, don't you?" she said. Not a question. "I do. She's 2. Her mother? Not around." Miss Patrice looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that takes your measure without needing you to explain yourself further. "You're going to do just fine, young man," she said. "I can always tell the ones who are going to do just fine. It's not in what they say. It's in how careful they are with things that aren't flashy. You were careful with my roof, like it was the only roof in the world that mattered." I didn't know it then, but Miss Patrice told 6 of her friends about the young man who'd done her roof with more care than the last 3 contractors combined, and every one of those 6 friends became a client within a year, and every one of those clients told someone else. That's how Raw Solar Solutions actually grew in the beginning. Not through advertising I couldn't afford, not through investors I didn't have access to, but through a network of careful, unhurried women who talk to each other the way careful, unhurried women always have, and decided, one referral at a time, that the young single father with a borrowed ladder deserved a chance. Miss Patrice passed away 4 years later, before the company had grown past its first 40 employees. I went to her funeral. I sat near the back, the way I still sit near the back of most rooms, and when the family found out afterward who I was, her daughter hugged me for a long time and told me her mother had kept a photo of my very first crew. 6 employees by then, standing in front of our first rented office space, on her refrigerator until the day she died. I think about that photo sometimes. I think about the particular kind of faith it takes for a 71-year-old widow to let an improving 29-year-old up onto her roof, and I try, every single day, to be worthy of the kind of faith people like Miss Patrice extended to me when I had absolutely nothing to offer in return except the promise that I'd be careful. The envelope had sat on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks before I opened it. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, the kind of invitation designed to make you feel like you were already behind if you hadn't RSVP'd yet. Westbrook High School, class of the year I graduated. 10-year reunion, black tie optional, cash bar. Please join us for an evening of memories. I threw it in the junk drawer with the takeout menus and old batteries. Amara found it 2 days later. The way kids find everything you're trying not to think about. "What's this, Daddy?" "Nothing. Grown-up stuff." "Is it a party?" "Kind of." She studied the gold letters with the seriousness of a 7-year-old auditor. "Are you going to go?" "Probably not, baby." "Why not?" I didn't have a good answer for that. The honest one, that the last time I stood in a room full of those people, I was the guy whose wife left him for someone with a bigger truck and a smaller conscience. Wasn't something I planned on saying to a second grader. "It's complicated," I said instead. Amara considered this the way she considered most things, with her head tilted and her bottom lip pushed out. Grandma says complicated is just a big word for scared. I laughed before I could stop myself. My mother had absolutely said that more than once, usually about me. You should go, Amara said, like the matter was settled. You always tell me not to be scared of things. That's different. Is it though? 7 years old. And she already had better instincts than half the adults I'd ever worked with. I called my business partner, Reggie, that night, mostly to talk myself out of it. Reggie had been with me since year 2, back when Raw Solar Solutions was still a folding table and a laptop that overheated every 90 minutes. He'd started as my first real hire, a licensed electrician with 15 years of experience who took a 15% pay cut to come work for a company that, at the time, had no guarantee of surviving its first winter. 6 years later, he ran operations for 400 employees and owned a piece of the company that had made him, by any reasonable measure, a wealthy man in his own right. Go, he said, before I'd even finished the sentence. You spent 6 years building something real, while people who used to talk about you got smaller and smaller in your rearview mirror. Go stand in that room. You don't have to say a word about the company. Just go close the door. I don't need to close anything, Reggie. I moved on a long time ago. Did you, though? His voice was gentle but pointed, the way it always got when he thought I was lying to myself. You still keep that notebook in your desk drawer, man. You don't do that if the door's already closed. I didn't have a good answer for that either. Go, he said again. For Amara, if not for yourself. Let that girl see her daddy walk back into a room that used to make him feel small and watch him not shrink. Close the door. That phrase stuck with me longer than I expected. So I RSVP'd. 1 seat. And then, because Amara had a way of embedding herself in every plan I made, a second seat beside it. The reunion allowed children for the early portion of the evening, and my daughter had informed me, with the finality of a judge issuing a ruling, that she was coming. Somebody's got to make sure you actually walk in the door, she said. I didn't have an argument for that either. I want to tell you about the day before the reunion, because it's the piece of the story that makes the rest of it make sense. Friday morning, I sat in a glass conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown Atlanta office building, across the table from 3 representatives from the governor's office and a delegation from the state's Department of Community Affairs. My CFO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Adiz Okafor, sat beside me with a leather folder of documents that had taken 11 months to negotiate. The deal was simple in concept and enormous in scale. Solar infrastructure retrofits for every municipal building across 3 counties, a partnership between the state and my company that would bring reliable, cost-reducing energy to schools, fire stations, water treatment facilities, and community centers across some of the poorest districts in the state, including, though nobody in that room mentioned out loud, the exact kind of neighborhood I'd grown up in myself. $480 million, the largest contract of its kind the state had ever signed. I remember the moment right before I signed my name. Adiz leaned over and whispered, "You built this from a truck with a bad alternator. Darnell, sit with that for 1 second before you sign." I did. I sat with it. I thought about Miss Patrice's roof and the frozen truck door and the 16-hour days and the $9 left in my checking account the week I made rent after the alternator repair. And I thought more than anything about Amara, 4 years old the year the company started, 7 years old now, asleep at home with a babysitter, while her father signed the biggest deal of his life on a Friday afternoon that would change absolutely nothing about her Saturday morning routine. Because that's exactly how I wanted it. I signed my name. The room applauded, the way rooms do for these things. Someone popped a bottle of sparkling cider because half the room didn't drink and nobody wanted to make it awkward. Photos were taken for a press release that would go out sometime over the weekend. And then I drove home, picked Amara up from the babysitter, and made her chicken nuggets and broccoli for dinner, the same as I would have on any other Friday, because a $480 million contract doesn't change the fact that a 7-year-old still needs her vegetables and her bedtime story, and her father sitting on the edge of her bed asking about her day. "How was work, Daddy?" she asked, halfway through her nuggets. "It was a good day, baby." "Good how?" Just good. I'll tell you more about it this weekend, okay? I had no idea, saying that how much sooner than the weekend she'd end up hearing about it, or how it would come out, or in front of how many people. The Regency's ballroom smelled like white flowers and old money, trying to remember what it used to smell like when it was new money. Chandeliers threw soft gold light across round tables draped in cream linen. A string quartet worked through something classical near the bar, competing politely with the low roar of 200 adults trying to prove, in 90 minutes or less, that their lives had turned out better than everyone else's. I straightened my jacket in the hotel elevator mirror. Plain charcoal suit, no pocket square, no statement. Amara stood beside me in a purple dress she'd picked out herself. Hair braided that morning, patent leather shoes that had cost more effort to buy than the suit I was wearing, because she has opinions about shoes the way other people have opinions about politics. "You look nervous," she said. "I'm not nervous. Your jaw does a thing." "What thing?" "The thing it does when you're nervous." I didn't have a comeback for that either. Kids are undefeated in arguments about your own face. We walked into the ballroom together, my hand resting light on her shoulder, and the room unfolded in front of us the way rooms like that always do. A wash of perfume and cologne, the low clink of glassware, a slideshow of old yearbook photos looping silently on a screen near the stage. Faces I hadn't thought about in a decade, suddenly familiar again in a particular way high school faces always are, aged but unmistakably themselves underneath. I recognized a few people near the entrance. Marcus Tillman, who played tight end on the football team and now, judging by the belly straining against his dress shirt, had clearly traded practice for a desk job. Renee Ashford, who used to run the yearbook committee, now standing near the bar in a group of women comparing something on their phones. A few nods passed between us, the polite, non-committal kind exchange between people who once share hallways but never share much else. The first face I truly recognized, the one that made my stomach tighten before I even processed why, was Simone's. She hadn't seen me yet. She was standing near the center of the room in a red dress that cost more than my first car, laughing at something a man beside her said, her head thrown back the exact way it used to when she thought she'd won a room. I hadn't seen her in 3 years. Not since the last time she'd shown up unannounced, stayed 40 minutes, and left again before Amara finished explaining her science fair project. Amara saw her at the same moment I did. Her hand found mine and held on tighter. "That's Mom," she said quietly. Not a question. "Yeah, baby. Is she going to be weird?" Out of the mouths of babes. "Maybe," I admitted. "You don't have to talk to her, if you don't want to." Amara nodded, filed that information away the way she filed everything, and we found a table near the back, close enough to room to be part of it, far enough to watch it without being watched. I ordered her a ginger ale and myself a glass of water, and for about 11 minutes, nothing happened at all. Then Simone turned, scanning the room the way people do when they're looking for someone to perform for, and her eyes landed on us. I watched something shift across her face. Recognition first, then something colder underneath it. She started walking toward our table, and the whole night changed direction. Here's what Simone didn't know. Walking across that ballroom floor in her red dress with her champagne glass catching the chandelier light, she didn't know that the parking garage she'd valeted her car into that evening had my company's logo stamped discreetly on the ticket stub in her purse. She didn't know that 11 hours earlier, I had sat in a glass conference room 40 floors above downtown Atlanta and signed my name to a contract that would bring solar infrastructure to every municipal building in 3 counties, a deal worth $480 million, the largest its kind of state had ever approved. She didn't know that the modest gray sedan I'd driven to the reunion, because a flashy car in a hotel parking garage draws exactly the kind of attention I spent 6 years avoiding, belonged to a man whose company now employed over 400 people, many of them single parents, many of them people the rest of the world had written off the same way it had once written off me. She didn't know that the man beside her, the one whose arm she looped through all evening, a smooth-talking real estate consultant named Preston, had already tried and failed to secure financing for 2 separate developments by dropping my company's name in meetings, hoping the association alone might open doors. He didn't have credentials to open himself. She didn't know any of it. All she saw, walking toward our table, was the same tired man in the same kind of suit he used to wear when they were married, sitting with a daughter she left behind, at a party where everyone else seemed to be climbing, and he seemed, from where she stood, to be exactly where she'd left him. That's the story she'd built in her head for 10 years. That's the story she needed to be true, because the alternative, that the man she walked out on had built something extraordinary out of the wreckage she left behind, was a story that would have required her to reckon with exactly what she'd given up. She was about to spend the next hour discovering how wrong she'd been. "Well, look who it is," Simone said, stopping a few feet from our table, her voice already pitched for an audience. "Darnell Ross, still bringing your kid to grown folks' parties like you can't afford a sitter." A few heads turned. Not many yet. Just enough. I kept my voice even. "Hello, Simone." She looked at Amara the way you'd look at a piece of furniture that had been rearranged without your permission. "Hey, baby," she said, distracted, already turning back to me. "So, what are you doing with yourself these days? Still doing the," she waved a hand vaguely, "the handyman thing? Contractor stuff? Something like that. Still in the same apartment? House now. Different one. She said it like a verdict. "Preston just closed on a place in Buckhead. 6 bedrooms. You should see the kitchen." Preston, standing a step behind her, offered a smile that had clearly been practiced in a mirror. "Congratulations," I said, and meant it about as much as she'd meant her earlier questions. Simone's circle had drifted closer now, drawn by the particular gravity a public conversation generates when everyone senses it might turn into something worth watching. I recognized a few faces from a decade earlier, people who used to sit 2 rows over in homeroom, now standing with drinks in hand, waiting to see which direction this was going to break. "You know," Simone said, raising her voice another notch, playing to the gathering crowd now, "I always felt kind of bad for you, Darnell. I really did. Raising a kid alone, working construction, no real plan for your life. It's sweet in a sad way." Amar's grip on my hand tightened again. "Don't talk about my daddy like that," she said. The words came out clear and small and entirely unafraid, and for one full second, the little cluster of adults around us went quiet. Simone laughed, but it came out thinner than she meant it to. "Sweetie, I'm not saying anything mean. I'm just being honest. Your daddy's a good man. He's just," she searched for the word, "settled. Some men are just built for settling. He built a whole company," Amara said. The words landed in the middle of that ballroom like a dropped glass. Simone blinked, recalibrating fast, the way people do when a script they wrote in their head runs into a line they didn't plan for. "A company," she repeated, half a laugh in it, playing to the crowd again. "Baby, that's sweet, but you don't have to make up stories to make your daddy sound impressive. He doesn't need that." "I'm not making up. Amara," I said quietly, a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay." "It's not okay," Amara said, looking up at me, her voice cracking just slightly, the first sign of real hurt breaking through her 7-year-old composure. "She's being mean to you, Daddy, in front of everybody." The ballroom had a way of tilting toward us now, conversations at nearby tables slowing, drinks pausing halfway to mouths. Simone felt it too. I watched her feel it, watched the calculation cross her face, the awareness that this moment could go one of 2 ways, and she needed to choose fast which one served her. She chose the wrong one. "Look," she said, laughing again, louder this time, performing for the room instead of speaking to us. "I don't know what fantasy you 2 have built together, but Darnell installs solar panels on people's roofs. That's not exactly Fortune 500, sweetheart." She looked around at the gathering crowd, inviting them into the joke. "Some men just never climb out a hole, they dig for themselves. I guess some things don't change." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the onlookers. Not everyone. Some faces had already gone tight with secondhand embarrassment, but enough laughed that Simone's shoulders relaxed, mistaking the sound for validation. I felt something old and familiar rise up in my chest. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more tired than anger. The specific exhaustion of being underestimated by someone for so long starts to feel like weather instead of insult. I could have said something in that moment. I had plenty I could have said. I didn't. I just looked at my daughter, whose eyes were wet but whose chin was up, refusing to look away from the woman who'd left her, and I made a decision that would define the rest of that night. "You should sit down for the rest of this, Simone," I said quietly. "You're about to say something you can't take back." She laughed again, but there was an edge under it now, something uncertain flickering behind her eyes for half a second before her performance smoothed back over it. "I don't have anything to slow down for, Darnell," she said. "I have my life together. I have Preston." She reached for his arm, pulling him a half step closer, presenting him to the crowd like an exhibit. "And you have a tool belt and a kid who tells fairy tales about you at parties." Behind me, near the edge of the small crowd, I noticed a face I recognized. Jordan Wells, a woman from my graduating class who now worked as a compliance auditor for the county. The kind of job that meant she noticed details most people never thought to look for. She wasn't laughing. Her arms were crossed, her jaw tight, watching Simone with an expression I couldn't quite read yet. She caught my eye. She gave the smallest nod, like she already knew something the rest of the room didn't. I didn't know yet what that nod meant. I was about to find out. There was something I had noticed about Preston almost from the moment he stepped into view, something I filed away without fully understanding it yet. He kept looking at my watch, not admiring it. A plain steel watch, my father's, worn every day for 6 years. Nothing flashy about it all, but measuring it, the way a man looks at a number he's trying to solve in his head, without anyone noticing he's doing math. Every time Simone laughed at something dismissive about me, Preston's eyes would flick to my wrist, then back to my face, then somewhere just past my shoulder, like he was calculating an angle he hadn't accounted for. I understood why about 30 seconds later. "Actually," Preston said, stepping forward with the easy confidence of a man used to being the smartest person in whatever room he walked into, "I think I might know your work. Darnell, solar installations, right? Residential mostly?" "We do both," I said. "Residential and commercial. Some infrastructure work, too." "Infrastructure," he repeated, and something in his tone shifted. "Careful now. Testing the ground the way a man tests ice before deciding whether it's safe to walk on." "What kind of infrastructure?" "Municipal contracts, mostly. Grid modernization." Simone rolled her eyes, already bored, already moving conversation back to where she wanted it. "He fixes streetlights, Preston. It's not that deep." But Preston wasn't looking at Simone anymore. He was looking at me with the particular attention of a man who just heard 2 words, municipal contracts. That meant something very specific to him. I'd learn later, from Jordan, exactly why those 2 words had turned his face that particular shade of pale. For now, all I knew was that a man I'd never met, standing beside the woman who'd left my daughter behind 10 years earlier, had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with politeness. "Small world," Preston said finally, his voice careful now. "I actually do some consulting work in that space myself." "Is that right?" "Development financing, mostly. Municipal partnerships." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We should exchange information sometime. Might be some synergy there." I looked at him for a long moment, calm and unhurried, and I felt the shape of something settle into place, though I didn't have all the pieces yet. "Maybe," I said. Simone, sensing the conversation had drifted somewhere she didn't control, pulled Preston back toward her circle with a proprietary hand on his arm. "Come on, baby. Let's go say hi to the Whitfields." As they walked away, Amara tugged my sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "why did that man get scared when you said the word contracts?" 7 years old, and she'd seen exactly what I'd seen. "I don't know yet, baby," I said, "but I think we're about to find out." Here's something about my daughter that I don't say often enough, because it sounds like the kind of thing every parent says about their kid. Amara notices everything. She noticed, before I did, that Simone's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at either of us. She noticed that Preston straightened his jacket every time someone new walked past, like he was perpetually auditioning for a role he wasn't sure he'd gotten. She noticed, sitting quietly at our table while the ballroom moved around us, that a woman 2 tables over kept glancing at Preston with an expression that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite suspicion, but sat somewhere uncomfortable between the two. "That lady keeps looking at the man Mom's with," Amara said, sipping her ginger ale through a straw with the seriousness of someone reporting classified intelligence. "Which lady?" "The one in the green dress. She's been looking at him since we sat down." I followed her gaze. Jordan Wells, arms still crossed, watching Preston across the room with the focused attention of someone doing quiet math of her own. "You've got good eyes, you know that?" "Grandma says I get from you," Amara said. "She says you used to figure out when the ice cream truck was coming just from the sound before anybody else could hear it." I laughed, the tightness in my chest loosening slightly for the first time since Simone had walked over. "That's true. I did do that. So what we do now?" "We wait," I said, "and we watch." "That's not a very exciting plan." "Most good plans aren't exciting until the end, baby." She considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old philosopher and went back to her ginger ale, but her eyes kept drifting back to the green dress across the room, and mine kept drifting back to my watch, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a piece of the picture I didn't have yet was starting to take shape. 20 minutes later, it would arrive all at once. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket at 8:47 p.m. I remember the time exactly because I checked out of habit, expecting a message from Reggie about the contract paperwork, and instead found a text from my head of communications, a woman named Priya, who almost never texted me on weekends unless something needed my attention immediately. Deal announcement just went out to press. Local news picking it up already. You're going to want to see this before it's everywhere. Congrats, boss. Attached was a screenshot of a local news alert. Atlanta-based clean energy firm signs record $480 million infrastructure deal with state. Founder Darnell Ross built company from single truck in 2019. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the particular strangeness of watching your private life become a headline while sitting at a table 50 feet from the woman who'd once told you that you'd never amount to anything. Amara leaned over to look at my phone. Her eyes went wide. "Daddy, is that you?" "Yeah, baby." "Is that real?" "That's a real news thing about you." "Looks like it." She looked up at me, and for a moment she wasn't performing anything, wasn't reporting intelligence, wasn't being the sharp little observer she'd been all evening. She just looked proud, in the uncomplicated way only a child can be proud of a parent, without any of the calculation adults bring to feeling. "Are you going to tell them?" she asked, nodding toward the ballroom, toward Simone's circle laughing near the bar. "Are you going to tell Mom?" I thought about that for a long moment. "I don't think I have to, baby," I said. "I think the truth's about to tell them itself." I wasn't wrong. It started the way these things always start, quietly at the edge of a room, one phone screen at a time. A man near the bar, refilling his drink, glanced down at his phone and did a double take. He looked up, scanned the room, found my face, looked back down at his screen, then back up again, like he was confirming a math problem he didn't quite believe. He showed the screen to the woman beside him. She looked over at our table too. Within 4 minutes, I watched the same sequence repeat itself at 3 more tables. A phone glancing down. A pause. A look up. A whispered word to whoever sat nearest. Simone hadn't noticed yet. She was still laughing near the bar. Preston's arm looped through hers, telling some story to a small circle of old classmates who were listening with particular attentiveness people reserve for someone they think might still matter. Jordan Wells noticed before Simone did. I watched her check her own phone, read something, and look up at me across the room with an expression that had shifted from careful suspicion into something closer to confirmation. She started walking toward our table. "Darnell," she said when she reached us, her voice low enough that only Amara and I could hear it clearly. "Is this real? The news thing? The state contract?" "It's real." She exhaled a short, sharp breath, like something had just clicked into place for her. "I knew your name sounded familiar when Simone said it earlier. I do compliance work for the county. I've seen your company's filings cross on my desk for the last 2 years. I just didn't put together that you were the same Darnell Ross from Westbrook. Small world," I said, echoing Preston's earlier words without meaning to. Jordan glanced over her shoulder toward Simone's circle, then back at me, and something hardened in her expression. "There's something else you should probably know," she said. "About Preston." Amara, who had been quietly following every word of this exchange with the focus of a much older child, looked up at Jordan. "Is he a bad guy?" Jordan looked down at her, surprised, then back at me with something like respect. "She's sharp. She gets that from her daddy," I said. Jordan lowered her voice further. "Preston Hale. That name mean anything to you?" "Nothing yet." "Give a minute," Jordan said. "It's about to." Here's what Jordan Wells knew, standing at our table with her arms still loosely crossed and her voice pitched low enough to stay between the three of us. 18 months earlier, her office had flagged an irregular bid on a municipal solar contract, a small county project, nothing close to the scale of what my company now handled, but enough money to matter to the small developer who'd submitted it. The paperwork had come back inconsistent. Subcontractor licenses that didn't check out, a shell vendor count routed through an address that turned out to be a self-storage facility in Marietta. The name on the consulting contract attached to that bid was Preston Hale. The bid had been rejected before any money moved, which was the only reason it never became a bigger story. But Jordan's office had kept the file open, flagged for review if his name ever showed up again. 9 months after that, a second project surfaced, this time in a neighboring county, a proposed community center retrofit that had gotten as far as a signed letter of intent before a routine background check on the financing partner turned up the same pattern. Documents that looked legitimate on the surface. Numbers that didn't survive a second look. A paper trail that led, eventually, to accounts that had been opened and closed within months of each other, always just ahead of the kind of scrutiny that would have exposed them. "He's done this at least twice that we know of," Jordan said. "Small operations, real enough on paper to get a foot in the door, but built on financing that doesn't actually exist. He finds a project, drops enough names and jargon to sound credible, tries to insert himself as a middleman, and disappears with consulting fee before anyone digs deep enough to notice the money underneath him was never real." "And Simone doesn't know," I said. It wasn't quite a question. "I don't know what Simone knows," Jordan said carefully. "But I know what I've watched him do to 2 other projects in this county in the last year and a half. And I know that every time somebody almost catches up to him, he's already 3 steps into the next one." Amara had gone very still beside me, absorbing all of this with particular seriousness she reserved for information she considered important. "Daddy," she said quietly, "is that man going to try to trick you too?" "I don't think he gets a chance to, baby," I said. "Not tonight." I looked across the ballroom to where Preston stood beside Simone, still performing for their small circle, still check his own phone every few minutes with the studied casualness of a man who hadn't yet realized the ground under him had started to shift. I hadn't planned on saying anything else that night. I'd planned on staying quiet, the way I usually did, letting the truth arrive in its own time without my help. But my daughter was watching me, and somewhere in that ballroom, a man was one conversation away from finding a way into my company under false pretenses, using a woman who thought she'd already won an argument she didn't understand she was losing. I stood up from the table. "Wait here a second, baby," I said. "I'm going to go say hello properly." I crossed the ballroom floor slowly, the way you cross a room when you're not trying to make a scene, just try and close a distance that's been open for 10 years. Simone saw me coming, and her expression did something complicated. A flicker of surprise, quickly smoothed back into the same practiced dismissiveness she'd worn all evening. "Come back for round two?" she said, loud enough for her circle to hear. "I thought we already covered the tool belt update." A few people laughed, fewer than before. I noticed that the room had started shifting under her, without her realizing it yet. I wanted to properly introduce myself to Preston. I said evenly, since it sounds like we might have some business overlap. Preston's smile flickered just slightly at the word business. "Preston does consulting," Simone said, a little defensively now. Sensing something in my tone she didn't have a name for yet. "Real estate and development financing. Very impressive stuff, actually, if you bother to ask instead of assuming." "I believe it," I said. "What's the name of your firm, Preston?" "Hale Development Partners," he said, recovering his composure fast, extending a hand like he did this every day. "We work primarily in municipal partnership structuring, bringing private capital into public infrastructure projects." "Interesting," I said, shaking his hand once, firm and brief. "I run a construction and infrastructure company myself. We actually closed a fairly large municipal contract yesterday." Simone rolled her eyes theatrically, playing to her audience again. Here we go with the fantasy story again. "It's not a fantasy," I said quietly. "It's $480 million, and my name is the one on the signature line." The words landed in the small circle around us the way a dropped glass lands on marble. A single clean sound, and then a silence that spreads outward from it in every direction. Nobody laughed this time. Somebody's champagne glass paused halfway to their mouth. A woman near the edge of the circle pulled out her phone, and I watched her thumb move across the screen, searching. Simone's face had gone very still. "That's," she started, then stopped, recalculating. "That's not. Darnell, you install solar panels." "I did," I said. 6 years ago, out of the back of a truck I bought with a loan my mother co-signed because no bank would touch me. Now I run a company that employs 400 people, and yesterday the state of Georgia signed the largest infrastructure contract in its history with my name on it." The woman with the phone turned her screen toward the person beside her. I watched the headline pass from hand to hand like something contagious. Preston had gone very quiet, his easy confidence draining out his posture in real time, replaced by something more careful, more calculating. The exact expression Amara had described earlier as looking scared. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the exit. Preston's recovery attempt came fast, the way it does for men who've spent their whole careers talking their way out of rooms. "Well," he said, forcing a laugh, "small world, right? We should definitely talk. I have some project proposals that might be a great fit for a company at your scale." "Actually," Jordan said, stepping into the circle now, her voice calm but carrying, "I don't think that's a great idea, Preston." Preston's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Jordan Wells, County Compliance. I believe you're familiar with the Havenbrook project from last year, and the Mill Creek bid the year before that." Every trace of color left Preston's face. "I don't know what you're both flagged for fraudulent subcontractor documentation," Jordan continued unhurried. "Both traced back to show vendor accounts registered at addresses that turned out to be storage units. Both listing Hale Development Partners as a primary consulting entity." She turned to Simone. "I'm guessing you didn't know any of that." Simone stared at Preston, her mouth slightly open, no comeback ready for the first time all night. That's a misunderstanding," Preston said, his voice climbing an octave. "Those were paperwork errors, not two separate incidents," Jordan said, 18 months apart, both involving fabricated financing documents. "That's not a paperwork error, Preston. That's a pattern." Simone turned to him slowly, something breaking open behind her eyes. "You told me your firm managed a 9-figure portfolio. You told me the Buckhead house was already half paid for from a deal you closed last spring." Preston didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicking toward the exit again, calculating distance the way a man calculates an escape route. "Preston," Simone said again, her voice cracking now, all the performance gone out of it. Is any of it real? Don't do this here, he said quietly, stepping back from her, distancing himself in real time. The same instinct I'd watched cross his face all night, finally winning out over whatever loyalty he pretended to have. This isn't the place. You told me I'd never have to worry about money again, Simone said, her voice rising now, past the point of caring who heard. You told my mother the house was already paid off. I told everyone in this room tonight that you were. She stopped herself, but not soon enough, the sentence hanging in the air, unfinished and understood by everyone listening anyway, that you were better than Darnell. The circle around them had gone completely silent. A few people had drifted back. No one wanted to stand too close to a collapse they hadn't caused, but didn't want to be caught watching too eagerly either. Preston straightened his jacket, the gesture of a man already halfway out the door in his mind, if not yet in his feet. This is a you problem, Simone, he said, and the coldness in his voice was its own kind of confession. He turned and walked toward the exit, without looking back. Simone stood there in the middle of the ballroom floor, in her red dress that had cost more than my first car, and for the first time in 10 years, I watched her understand, really understand, exactly how much she didn't know. There's a version of this story where I walk away right there, satisfied, the wreckage of Simone's evening finally matching the wreckage she left behind in mine 10 years earlier. I didn't walk away. Not yet. Simone turned to me, something raw breaking through composure she'd worn like armor all night. You knew, she said. You knew about him, didn't you? That's why you came over. I didn't know about him specifically, I said. I knew something was wrong. Amara noticed before I did, honestly. Simone's eyes moved past me to the table where Amara sat, small and still, watching everything with the same careful attention she'd shown all evening. She's 7, Simone said quietly, like she was noticing for the first time. She's 7. I agreed. She's also the reason I didn't say a word about the company until you'd already made your choices about how to treat us tonight. I wasn't hiding it to trap you, Simone. I just stopped needing anyone's permission to know what I was worth a long time ago. Simone was quiet for a moment, the ballroom moving around us, conversation slowly resuming at a lower volume. The particular hum of a room that had just witnessed something it would talk about for weeks. Why didn't you ever tell me? She asked. Any of it. The company, the contracts, any of it. Would it have mattered? I asked 10 years ago. You were the man who worked double shifts, hoping you'd notice the effort. I don't think you were staying around for a company that didn't exist yet either. She flinched at that, small but visible. I've thought about that night a lot, I continued, my voice steady, no anger left in it, just plain fact. The night you left, you said you needed to find yourself. I used to lay awake wondering what that meant, what I was supposed to have done differently. Darnell, I stopped wondering a few years ago, I said. I realized I didn't do anything wrong by staying steady. You just wanted something I wasn't offering yet, and I understand that now better than I did then. But you left a 2-year-old behind to go find it, and that part one never stopped needing you to understand. Simone's eyes filled, the first real emotion I'd seen from her all night that wasn't performance. I think about her, she said quietly. More than you probably believe. Maybe, I said, but thinking about her from a distance for 10 years isn't the same as braiding her hair at 7 in the morning, or sitting up with her during a fever, or explaining to a 7-year-old why her mother only shows up twice a year, for 40 minutes at a time. Simone had no answer for that. There wasn't one. I looked back toward our table, where Amara sat watching the two of us with an expression far too old for her face, and I felt the pull to go back to her, to end this conversation before it asked anything more of either of us than it already had. I'm not here to make you feel small, Simone, I said, softer now. I came tonight because my daughter wanted me to close a door that had been left cracked open for 10 years. I think it's closed now. I turned to walk back to our table. Behind me, I heard her voice, thinner now, stripped of every ounce of performance it had carried all evening. Darnell, wait. I didn't turn around. Amara was standing by the time I reached our table, her small hand already reaching for mine. Her purple dress slightly wrinkled from an evening of sitting still and watching adults be complicated in the ways only adults manage to be. "Can we go home now?" she asked. "Yeah, baby. Let's go home." We walked out through the ballroom doors together, past tables still buzzing with particular electricity of a room that had just watched something it would be talking about for weeks, past a bar where the string quartet had picked back up mid-song like nothing had happened at all, out into the cool October air on Peachtree Street. The valet brought the gray sedan around. Amara climbed into her booster seat in the back, and I held the door for her the way I did every single day, the way I'd done every day for 6 years, whether anyone was watching or not. We drove home mostly in silence, the city lights sliding past the windows, Atlanta doing its ordinary Saturday night thing, entirely unaware what just unraveled 3 miles behind us in a hotel ballroom. "Daddy," Amara said, somewhere around the 4th red light. "Yeah, baby? Are you sad about Mom?" I thought about that question honestly before I answered, the way I try to answer all of Amara's questions, because she has a way of knowing when I'm not being straight with her. A little, I admitted, but not the way I used to be. I think I've been sad about it for so long it stopped feeling like sadness a while ago. Now it mostly just feels like something that happened. Is that good or bad? I think it's just true, I said. Sometimes true isn't good or bad. It's just true. Amara considered this with her usual gravity. "She said mean things about you," she said quietly, in front of everybody. "She did." That made me really mad. "I know, baby. I saw your face." "Are you mad?" I thought about that too. "I think I stopped being mad about Simone a long time ago," I said. What I felt tonight wasn't anger. Exactly. It was more like relief. Like a door finally closing all the way after being cracked open for 10 years. Amara was quiet for a moment, watching the streetlights blur past her window. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she said finally, her voice small but certain. "Not because of the company thing. I was already proud of you before that." I had to blink hard at the road for a second before I trusted my voice enough to answer her. "That means more to me than the $480 million, baby," I said. "I promise you that. That's a lot of money, though." I laughed, the tightness in my chest finally, fully releasing. "Yeah, it is." We got home a little after 10. I made Amara a cup of hot chocolate she didn't finish, got her into pajamas, read half a chapter of the book we'd been working through for the last 2 weeks, and sat with her until her breathing slowed into sleep. Then I went downstairs to the small office off the kitchen, the room where I'd built the earliest version of my company on a card table and a laptop that used to overheat if I ran it more than 2 hours at a stretch. And I sat down at the desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. There was a notebook in there, black, spiral-bound, the corners soft from years of handling. I'd started at the year Simone left. Every cruel thing anyone said to me during those first hard years, written down, dated, exact. Not to build a case against anyone, not for revenge. Just so I'd never forget who I used to let define what I thought I was worth. I flipped through it slowly. Pages of small, tired handwriting from 2 a.m. shifts and rejected loan applications, and a landlord who told me a single father with a construction job wasn't the kind of tenant he was looking for. I found the last entry, dated the week Amara turned 3. Simone came by, told me I'd never build anything real, told me Amara deserved better than a father who smelled like sawdust every night. I sat with that page for a long time. Then I closed a notebook, and for the first time in 6 years, I didn't put it back in the drawer. I set it on the corner of the desk where I could see it, and I decided I'd finally let it go, not by throwing it away, not as some symbolic gesture for anyone else to witness, but quietly, the way I'd handled most things that actually mattered. Some chapters don't need a dramatic close. They just need you to stop turning back to reread them. The story hit the local news cycle by Sunday morning. A clean energy founder, a record-breaking state contract, a company built from a single truck to 400 employees in 6 years. A few outlets picked up the human angle. Single father, no outside investment for the first 3 years. Every early contract signed between school drop-off and pickup. None of them mentioned the reunion. That story belonged to the people who'd been in the room, and it traveled the way those stories always do. Quietly, through group texts and Monday morning conversations, growing a little with each retelling, the way stories do when they're worth retelling. My phone rang around 9. My mother, Darnell Antoine Ross, she said, using my full name the way she only did when she was either very proud or very upset, and it took me a second to figure out which. Is it true? The news, the contract. It's true, Mama. Lord have mercy. I could hear her sitting down, the creak of her kitchen chair through the phone. And you didn't think to call your own mother before it hit the 6 o'clock news? I was going to tell you this week. I promise. A pause. Was Simone there last night? At that reunion? Word traveled fast, even to my mother, who hadn't been anywhere near that ballroom. She was there. And it's a long story. I've got time, my mother said. Amara up yet? Just waking up. Put her on the phone before you tell me anything. I want to hear this from a 7-year-old first. Kids always tell it straighter than grown folks do. I smiled, carrying the phone upstairs where Amara was blinking awake in a tangle of blankets, and handed it to her. Grandma wants to hear about last night. I said, tell her everything. Amara took the phone with the seriousness of someone accepting an important assignment, and I stood in the doorway and listened to my daughter recount the entire evening in the unfiltered, unhurried way only a child can. The red dress, the ginger ale, the man who got scared when I said the word contracts, the way I stood up straight and told everybody the truth without ever raising my voice. And then Amara said, her voice rising with the satisfaction of reaching the best part of a good story, Daddy said it was $480 million. And the whole room got quiet. Grandma, like really quiet. I heard my mother's laugh crackle through the phone, warm and delighted. The same laugh I'd grown up falling asleep to through thin apartment walls. That's my grandbaby, she said, telling it exactly like it happened. Monday morning at the office was its own kind of chaos. The good kind. The kind that comes from 400 people finding out their company just made history and wanting, in their own individual ways, to be part of celebrating it. Reggie met me at the elevator with a grin. He wasn't even trying to hide. You're famous now, he said. I had 3 separate people ask me this morning if I could get them tickets to meet you. I told them you don't do meet and greets. You do 6 a.m. school drop-offs. Somebody's got to keep me honest. Adi's already fielding calls from 2 other states asking about our model. You realize this contract just made us the case study every clean energy company in the Southeast is going to be studying for the next 5 years. I hadn't fully processed that yet. I don't think I processed it that whole first week, honestly. There's a strange lag between the moment something enormous happens and the moment it actually feels real. And for me, that lag lasted the better part of a month. What felt real immediately was walking the floor that Monday morning and watching people I'd hired years earlier. Installation crews, project managers, a woman in accounts payable named Denise who'd started the same month I hired my 50th employee, come up to me one by one, not to talk about the contract, but just to say congratulations, and mean it in the specific way people mean things when they've actually been part of building something alongside you rather than just watching it. From the outside, Denise stopped me near the break room. My daughter watched a news clip about you Saturday night, she said. She's 12. She asked me if regular people could really build something that big. I told her yes. I told her I work for one of them. I didn't have a good response for that beyond thank you, which felt insufficient for what she was actually telling me. So I just said it anyway, because sometimes insufficient is all you've got, and it still means something. That afternoon, I sat down with Dees and Reggie in my office. Not the glass conference room 40 floors up. My actual office, small, cluttered, a drawing of Mara had made me still taped to the wall beside my desk. And we talked, for the first time in any real detail, about what came next. You built something that works, Adi said. The question now is whether you want it to just keep working or whether you want to start giving something back on purpose, at scale, instead of just accidentally, the way it's been doing all along. I knew exactly what she meant, because I've been thinking about it for years without ever having the resources to act on it. I want to build something for people who are where I was. I said, not a handout, steady ground. That's all I ever needed. Just steady ground long enough to build something real. Adi smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her all week. I think we can build that, she said. I didn't hear from Simone again for almost 3 weeks. When the message finally came, it wasn't dramatic, just a text late on a Tuesday night. I'm sorry for how I acted at the reunion. I've had a lot of time to think since then. I know sorry doesn't undo 10 years, but I wanted you to know I meant it. I looked at it for a long time before I answered. I don't need an apology for me. I wrote back eventually. If you ever want to be in Amara's life the right way, showing up consistent, not just when it's convenient, that's a conversation I'm open to having. But it has to be about her, not about making yourself feel better. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, 3 days later, it was shorter than I expected. I understand. I'd like to try if you'll let me. We're still figuring that part out. Simone and me. It's slow. It's careful. There have been missed calls and canceled visits and a birthday she showed up late to. And there have also, more recently, been 2 Saturday mornings in a row where she arrived on time, sat through an entire pancake breakfast, and asked Amara real questions instead of performing interest for an audience that wasn't even there. I don't know yet whether it lasts. I've learned not to build my expectations around promises people make when they're trying to prove something to themselves. What I do know is that Amara gets to decide, one visit at a time, how much room her mother earns back in her life. Nobody gets to skip that process. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because some things have to be rebuilt the same slow way they were broken, one honest day at a time, with nobody forcing the pace. I asked Amara once, a few weeks after that first pancake breakfast, how she felt about her mother trying again. She thought about it for a long time before she answered, longer than I expected. I think I want to give her a chance, she said finally, but not a big chance. A little one first, and then we see. 7 years old, and she already understood something about trust that takes some adult a lifetime to learn. That isn't a door you throw open all at once. It's a door you open an inch at a time, watching carefully to see whether the person on the other side respects the pace you've set. I called Jordan Wells the Monday after the reunion, mostly to thank her, but also because something about the way she stepped into that circle, unasked, uninvited, had stayed with me all weekend. I didn't do it for drama, she told me on the phone, her voice matter-of-fact in a way I appreciated. I did it because I watched too many people talk down to good men in rooms like that one, and I got tired of staying quiet about it, especially watching you stand there, taking it, for your daughter's sake, not saying a word you didn't have to say. You didn't have to say anything either, I told her. Nobody would have blamed you for staying out of it. Maybe, she said, but somebody finally needed to name what was happening in that circle instead of just watching it happen. I've spent my whole career flagging patterns other people would rather ignore because naming them is inconvenient. I wasn't about to stop just because it was a party instead of a courtroom. She told me that call a little more about her work, how she'd ended up in compliance auditing almost by accident, starting as an entry-level records clerk for the county a decade earlier and working her way up one meticulous file at a time, because she discovered early on that she had a particular gift for noticing the small inconsistency that unraveled a much larger lie. People think fraud is dramatic, she said. It's not. It's boring. It's a mismatched address on page 14 of a document nobody else bothered to read all the way through. That's it. That's the whole game. Most people get away with it because most people don't have the patience to read page 14. You read page 14 on Preston. I read page 14 on Preston 18 months before I ever knew his girlfriend used to be married to you, she said, and I could hear the small, satisfied smile in her voice. The reunion was just the first time I got to watch the consequences catch up to him in person instead of on paper. Preston never worked another municipal contract in the state of Georgia again. The file Jordan's office had kept open finally closed months later, with enough evidence attached to end his career in that particular corner of the industry for good. Not because of anything that happened in that ballroom, but because Jordan's original investigation, quiet and patient and entirely separate from Simone or me, had already been building toward exactly that outcome long before any of us knew his name. The reunion just happened to be the night it finally caught up with him in front of an audience. There's one more piece of this story I haven't told you yet, and it's the piece that matters most to me, more than the contract, more than the ballroom, more than anything that happened that night on Peachtree Street. 2 months after the reunion, I sat down with my company's foundation team and set up something I've been thinking about for years but never had the resources to actually build: a scholarship fund for single parents pursuing trade certifications and small business licenses, named quietly, without my name attached to it, funded permanently out of the company's annual earnings. We call it the Steady Ground Fund because that's what I needed most in the years nobody was watching. Not a handout, not a rescue. Just steady ground under my feet long enough to build something real. The first cohort was 11 people. Single mothers, mostly. A few single fathers. All of them working the kind of unglamorous jobs I used to work. All of them one broken transmission or one missed paycheck away from losing whatever ground they'd managed to claim. I didn't put my name on the announcement. Reggie handled the press release. The foundation's executive director handled the ceremony. I showed up in the back of the room, in a plain gray suit, and watched 11 people receive checks that would let them finish certifications they'd been chipping away at for years between double shifts. Amara came with me. She sat beside me in the back row, 7 years old, watching adults cry happy tears over opportunities most people her age would never think twice about. "Why don't you go up there and tell them it's you?" she whispered. "Don't they want to say thank you?" "They don't need to thank me, baby," I said. "I just need them to have the chance nobody gave me when I needed it." She thought about that for a long moment, watching a woman near the front hug her own 2 kids after opening her award letter. "That's the best kind of secret," Amara said finally. "The kind that helps people even when they don't know it's you." Out of the mouths of babes, again. I want to tell you about one recipient in particular, because her story stayed with me longer than the others. Her name was Renata Cole, 34 years old, a single mother of 3, working 2 part-time jobs while chipping away, 1 evening class at a time, an HVAC certification she started and stopped for separate times over 6 years because life kept interrupting. A car that died, a child hospital stay, a landlord who raised the rent with 30 days' notice. When she opened her award letter at that ceremony, she didn't cry the way some of the others had. She just sat very still for a long moment, staring at the number, and then she looked up and said, to no one in particular, loud enough that I heard it from the back row, "I can finally finish." 2 words. I can finally finish. I've thought about those 2 words more than almost anything else that happened in that entire year, because I remembered exactly what it felt like to not know whether you'd ever get to finish anything, to live so close to the edge that every unfinished certification, every abandoned plan, every deferred dream felt like one more piece of evidence in a case the world seemed determined to build against you. Renata finished her certification 4 months later. She sent the foundation a photo of her license, framed, hanging on the wall of the small HVAC repair business she started 8 months after that. I keep a printed copy of that photo in the same desk drawer where the old notebook used to live. Some replacements matter more than others. Here's something Simone still doesn't know, all these months later. She doesn't know that the day after the reunion, I called Jordan Wells to thank her, not just for exposing Preston, but for the small, steady kindness of stepping into a moment that wasn't hers to fix and fixing it anyway, because she'd recognized an injustice and refused to let it slide. She doesn't know about Renata Cole or the 10 other people in that first cohort, or the 43 people who've come to the Steady Ground Fund in the time since, each of them one small, specific step closer to the kind of stability I spent years chasing without a map. She doesn't know that Amara still talks about that night sometimes, not with anger, but the way kids talk about the moment they first understood something true about the world. That the people who talk the loudest about your failures are usually the ones most afraid you're about to prove them wrong. And she doesn't know, because I've never told her that I still have that black spiral notebook, not in the drawer anymore, in a box in the garage, alongside my father's old tools and a few photographs from years I don't visit often. I kept it, not out of bitterness, but because it reminds me, every so often, of exactly how far quiet, steady work can carry a man who refuses to give up on himself, even when nobody else believes he will. A few months after the reunion, Amara's school held its annual career day, the kind of event where parents come in and talk to a room full of 8-year-olds about what they do for a living. I'd never been able to attend one before. The timing never worked, or the job itself was hard to explain in a way that held a second grader's attention for more than 90 seconds. This year, Amara asked me herself, "You should come talk about the solar company," she said. "Kayla's dad is a dentist. He's going to bring a fake tooth. I told everybody my dad builds stuff that makes electricity from the sun. They didn't believe me." "I can fix that," I said. I showed up that Thursday morning in jeans and a company polo instead of the suit, because 8-year-olds don't care about suits, and I brought a small solar panel from the office, the kind we use for training demonstrations, wired up to a little fan that spun the moment sunlight hit the panel through the classroom window. I watched 22 kids crowd around that little fan like I brought them a magic trick, which, from where they were standing, I basically had, "So the sun makes a fan spin?" One boy asked. His whole face lit up a particular wonder only kids have left for things adults have long since stopped noticing. "The sun makes electricity," I told him, "and the electricity makes the fan spin. That's basically what my whole company does, just bigger. We put panels like this one on schools and fire stations and libraries, so those buildings don't have to pay as much money for their power, and the money they save can go toward other things those buildings need." "Like more books?" a girl near the front asked. "Exactly like more books." Amara sat in the front row through the whole thing, not saying much, just watching the other kids react to something she'd already known for months, wearing an expression of quiet, unhurried pride that I don't think I'll ever forget as long as I live. Afterward, her teacher pulled me aside for a moment while the kids filed out for recess. "I just want you to know," she said, "Amara talks about you all the time. Not about the company. Actually, she barely mentions that. She talks about the mornings, the braids, the pancakes on Sunday." I had no idea, until the news broke a few months back, that her father was, she paused, searching for the right way to say it, "that successful." She never once made it about that. "That's exactly how I want it," I told her. The mornings are the part that actually built everything else. A few weeks ago, on a Sunday evening with the light going soft and gold over our backyard, Amara and I sat out on the porch steps together, the way we do most weekends when the weather cooperates. She had a bowl of grapes balanced on her knee, and a question waiting, the way she almost always does. "Daddy," she said, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you didn't go to that reunion?" I thought about it honestly before answering, the way I try to answer everything she asks me. I think about it sometimes. I admitted I think the company would have turned out the same either way. That part wasn't about Simone. That part was about 6 years of getting up at 5:45 every morning, whether anybody was watching or not. So, what was a reunion for then? "I think it was for closing a door," I said. "Some doors you can walk away from and just leave cracked open behind you. Other ones you got to walk all the way through and shut behind you on purpose, or you carry the draft around with you for the rest of your life without even realizing it." Amara considered this, popping a grape into her mouth with the unhurried focus of a 7-year-old who has all the time in the world. "I'm glad we went," she said finally. "Me too, baby. Even though Mom was mean. Because I got to see you be brave," she said. "Not the loud kind of brave. The quiet kind. Like when you didn't yell at her, you just told the truth and let it do the work. I looked at my daughter, 7 years old, sitting on our porch steps with grape juice on her fingers and more wisdom in her than most adults I've ever shared a boardroom with, and I thought about my grandmother's porch on the other side of town, and the things she used to say before her knees gave out and she couldn't sit out there anymore. A man's worth lives in what he builds when nobody's watching. I'd spent 6 years testing whether that was true. Sitting on that porch with my daughter, the sky going pink and gold behind the trees, I finally believe it all the way through. Not as a saying anymore, but as something lived, morning by ordinary morning, until it became real enough to sit inside of. Amara leaned her head against my shoulder the way she does when the conversations found its natural end, and we sat there a while longer, watching the light fade, not needing to say anything else. That's the part of the story nobody in that ballroom will ever understand. Not the ones who laughed, not the ones who gasped, not even Simone, standing in the wreckage an evening she thought she controlled. The real ending wasn't the $480 million. It wasn't the headline or the collapse of a con man's carefully built lies, or even particular satisfaction of watching a woman who once called me nothing discover exactly how wrong she'd been. The real ending was quieter than all of that. It was a porch, a bowl of grapes, a little girl who already knew, long before the rest of the world caught up, exactly what her father was worth. If this story reminded you that goodness is never wasted, even when it's ignored for a while, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you believe quiet strength deserves more attention than loud judgment ever will, you know what to do before you go. We tell more stories like this one every week. Real single dads, real quiet strength, real justice earned the slow way, one honest morning at a time.